Objective number 5. Identify the 5 competitive forces and explain how they determine an industry's profit potential. An industry is a group of firms producing products that are close substitutes for each other. As they compete for market share, the strategies implemented by these companies influence each other and include a broad mix of competitive strategies as each company pursues strategic competitiveness and above-average returns. It should be noted that unlike the general environment, which has an indirect effect on strategic competitiveness and firms' profitability, the effect of the industry environment is more direct. Industry and individual firm profitability and the intensity of competition in an industry are a function of 5 competitive forces as presented in Figure 2.2. The 5 forces model of competition indicates that these forces interact to determine the intensity or strength of competition, which ultimately determines the profitability of the industry. Threat of new entrants, threat of substitute products, bargaining power of buyers or the customers, bargaining power of suppliers, and lastly, rivalry among competing firms in an industry. Assessing the relative strength of the 5 competitive forces is important to a firm's ability to achieve strategic competitiveness and earn above-average returns. Viewed differently, competition should be seen as groupings of alternative ways that customers can obtain desired results. Thus, any analysis of an industry must expand beyond the traditional practice of concentrating on direct competitors to include potential competitors. For example, suppliers can become competitors by integrating forward. Buyers or customers can become competitors by integrating backwards. Firms that are not competitors today could produce products that serve as substitutes for existing products offered by firms in the industry, transforming themselves into competitors. Let's first look at threat of new entrants. New entrants to an industry are important because with new competitors, the intensity of competitive rivalry in industry generally increases. This is because new competitors may bring substantial resources into the industry and may be interested in capturing a significant market share. If a new competitor brings additional capacity to the industry when product demand is not increasing, prices that can be charged to consumers generally will fall. One result may be a decline in sales and lower returns for many firms in the industry. For example, the transformation of the steel industry when many mills such as Nucor and Birmingham Steel enter the industry in competition with integrated domestic producers such as U.S. Steel and Bethlehem Steel. The impact of the increase in the number of cell phone providers on the cost of having a cell phone and in the long-range potential impact on the cost of local telephone service. And then lastly, the increase in the number of internet access providers and the effects of increased competition on such firms as CompuServe and America Online. The seriousness or extent of the threat of new entrants is affected by 2 factors: barriers to entry and expected reactions from incumbent firms in the industry. Barriers to entering an industry are present when entry is difficult or when it is too costly and places a potential entrant at a competitive disadvantage. 7 factors represent potentially significant entry barriers that can emerge as an industry evolves or might be explicitly erected by current participants in the industry to protect profitability by deterring new competitors from entering. The first one is economies of scale. Economies of scale can serve as an entry barrier when existing firms in the industry have achieved these scale economies, and a potential new entrant is only able to enter the industry on a small scale, thus producing at a higher cost per unit. Economies of scale can be overcome as a potential entry barrier by firms that produce multiple customized products or that enter an industry in a large enough scale. New manufacturing technology facilitated by advanced information systems has allowed the development of mass customization in an increasing number of industries, and online ordering has enhanced the ability of customers to obtain customized products, often referred to as markets of one. Product differentiation. Customers may perceive that products offered by existing firms in the industry are unique as a result of services offered, effective advertising campaigns, or being first to offer a product of service to the market. If customers perceive a product or service as unique, they generally are loyal to this brand. Thus, new entrants may be required to spend a great deal of money over a long period of time to overcome customer loyalty to existing products. Though new entrants may be able to overcome perceived uniqueness and brand loyalty, the cost of such strategies generally will be high. Offering lower prices, additional features, or allocating significant funds to a major advertising and promotion campaign. In the short run, new entrants that try to overcome uniqueness and brand loyalty may suffer lower profits or may be forced to operate at a loss. Capital requirements. Firms choosing to enter an industry must commit resources for facilities, to purchase inventory, to pay salaries and benefits. Though entry may seem attractive, a potential new entrant may not have sufficient capital to enter the industry. Switching costs is another factor. These are the one-time costs customers will incur when buying from a different supplier. They can include such explicit costs as retaining of employees or retooling equipment, as well as the psychological costs of changing relationships. Incumbent firms in the industry generally try to establish switching costs to offset new entrants that try to win customers with substantially lower prices or an improved or to some extent different product. Assess distribution channels. An existing firm in the industry generally have developed effective channels for distributing products. These same channels may not be available to new firms entering the industry. Thus, access, or lack thereof, may serve as an effective barrier to entry. This may be particularly true for consumer non-durable goods and in international markets. In the case of some durable goods or industrial products, to overcome the barrier, new entrants must again incur costs in excess of those paid by existing firms, either through lowering price or price breaks, costly promotion campaigns, or advertising allowances. New entrants may have to incur significant costs to establish a proprietary distribution channel. As in the case of product differentiation or uniqueness barriers, new entrants may suffer lower profits or operate at a loss as they battle to gain access to distribution channels. Another factor is cost disadvantage independent of scale. Existing firms in the industry often are able to achieve cost advantages that cannot be costlessly duplicated by new entrants. These can include proprietary process or product technology, more favorable access to or control of raw materials, the best locations, or favorable government subsidies. Potential entrants must find ways to overcome these disadvantages to be able to effectively compete in the industry. This may mean successfully adapting technologies from other industries and or non-competing products for use in the target industry, developing new sources of raw materials, making products or services enhancements to overcome location-related disadvantages, or selling at a lower price to attract customers. Government policy is another one. Governments at all levels are able to control entry into an industry through licensing and permit requirements. For example, at the firm level, entry into the banking industry is regulated at both the federal and state levels, whereas liquor sales are regulated at the state and local levels. In some cases, state and or federal licensing requirements limit entry into the personal services industry, while in other, only state requirements may limit entry, for example, barbers or beauticians. Now, expected retaliation can occur. Even if a firm concludes that it can successfully overcome all the entry barriers, it still must take into account or anticipate reactions that are expected from existing firms. Strong retaliation is likely when existing firms have a heavy investment in fixed assets, or when industry growth is slow or declining. Retaliation could take form of announcements of anticipated future investments to increase capacity, new product plans, price cutting, or study to assess the impact of lower prices. Now, this might imply price cutting as promised entry-level barrier creation strategy by existing firms. Small entrepreneurial firms can provide retaliation by identifying and serving neglected market segments. For example, Honda first entered the U.S. market by concentrating on small engine motorcycles, a market that firms such as Harley-Davidson ignored. After consolidating its position, Honda went on the offensive by introducing larger motorcycles and competing in the broader market. Bargaining power of suppliers. The bargaining power of suppliers depends on suppliers' economic bargaining power relative to firms competing in the industry. Suppliers are powerful when firm profitability is reduced by suppliers' actions. Suppliers can exert their power by raising prices or restricting the quality or quantity of goods available for sale. Suppliers are powerful relative to firms competing in the industry when 1. The supplier segment of the industry is dominated by a few large companies and is more concentrated than the industry to which it sells. 2. Satisfactory substitute products are not available to industry firms. 3. Industry firms are not significant customer group for supplier group. Next, suppliers' goods are critical to buyers and marketplace success. Next, effectiveness of suppliers' products have created high switching costs for buyers. And lastly, suppliers represent a credible threat to integrate forward into buyers' industry, especially when suppliers have substantial resources and provide highly differentiated products. In the airline industry, suppliers' bargaining power is changing. There are a few suppliers, but demand for the major aircraft is also low. Boeing and Airbus compete strongly for most orders of major aircraft. However, China recently announced plans to enter the market by building large commercial aircraft, significant in a country that is projected to produce thousands. While firms seek to maximize their return on invested capital, buyers are interested in purchasing products at the lowest possible price. To reduce costs or maximize value, customers bargain for higher quality or greater levels of service at the lowest possible price by encouraging competition among firms in the industry. Buyer groups are powerful relative to firms competing in the industry when buyers are important to sellers because they purchase a large portion of the supply industry's total sales. 2. Products purchased from a supply industry represents a significant portion of the seller's annual revenues. 3. Buyers are able to switch to another supplier's product at little, if any, cost. And lastly, suppliers' products are undifferentiated and standardized, and the buyers represent a real threat to integrate backward into the supplier's industry using resources or expertise. Armed with greater amounts of information about the manufacturer's costs and the power of the internet as a shopping and distribution alternative, consumers appear to be increasing their bargaining power in many industries. One reason for this shift is that individual buyers incur virtual zero switching costs when they decide to purchase from one manufacturer rather than another, or from one dealer as opposed to a second or third one. All firms must recognize that they compete against firms producing a substitute products, those products that are capable of satisfying similar customer needs but come from outside the industry and thus have different characteristics. In effect, prices charged for substitute products represent the upper limit on the prices that suppliers can change for their products. The threat of substitute products is greatest when buyers or consumers face few, if any, switching costs. 2. Prices of the substitute products are lower. And lastly, quality and performance capabilities of substitutes are equal to or greater than those of the industry's products. Firms can offset the attractiveness of substitute products by differentiating their products in ways that are perceived by customers as relevant. Viable strategies might include price, product quality, product features, location, or service level. Intensity of rivalry among competitors. The intensity of rivalry in industry depends on the extent to which firms in the industry compete with one another to achieve strategic competitiveness and earn above average returns, because success is measured relative to other firms in the industry. Competition can be based on price, quality, or innovation. Because of the interrelated nature of firms' actions, action taken by one firm generally will result in retaliation by competitors, also known as competitive response. In addition to actions and reactions that result as firms attempt to offset the other competitive forces in the industry, threat of new entry, power suppliers and buyers, and threat of substitute products, the intensity of competitive rivalry is also a function of a number of other factors. Industries with high number of firms can be characterized by intense rivalry when firms feel they can make competitive moves that will go unnoticed by other firms in the industry. However, other firms will generally notice these moves and offer counter moves of their own in response. Patterns of frequent actions and reactions often result in intense rivalry, such as local restaurant retailing or dry cleaning industries. Rivalry also is intense in an industry that has only a few firms of equivalent resources and power. The firm's resources bases enable each other to take frequent action to improve their competitive positions, which in turn produce a reaction or countermove by competitors. Battles for market share in the fast food industry between McDonald's and Burger King, in the automotive industry between such firms as GM, Ford, and Toyota, and athletic shoes between Nike and Reebok are examples of intense rivalry between relatively equivalent competitors. Of course, Boeing versus Airbus is an especially useful example. Slow industry growth. When a market is growing at a level where there seems to be enough customers for everyone, competition generally centers around effective use of resources so that a firm can effectively serve a larger growing customer base. Because of sufficient growth in the market, firms do not concentrate on taking customers away from other firms. The intensity of competition often results in a reduction in industry profitability, as observed in the fast food industry with the battle for a slower growing traditional U.S. customer base between McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's. The intensity of competition can be illustrated by the various competitive strategies followed by firms in the fast food industry. Rapid and continuous introduction of new products and new packaging schemes, the introduction of innovative pricing strategies, product and or service differentiation. When an industry is characterized by high fixed costs relative to total costs, firms produce in quantities that are sufficient to use a large percentage, if not all, of their production capacity so that fixed costs can be spread over the maximum volume of output. Though this may lower per unit cost, it also can result in excess supply of market growth. It is not sufficient to absorb the excess inventory. The intensity of competitive rivalry increases as firms use price reductions, rebates, and other discounts or special terms to reduce inventory, as observed in the automobile industry from the 1980s to the present. Higher storage costs, especially those related to perishable or time-sensitive products such as fruits and vegetables, also can result in high levels of competitive intensity, as such products rapidly lose their value if not sold within a given time period. Pricing strategies often are used to sell such products. Products that are not characterized by brand loyalty or perceived uniqueness are generally viewed by buyers as commodities. For such products, industry rivalry is more intense and competition is based primarily on price, service, and other features of interest to consumers. Switching costs can be used to decrease the likelihood that customers will switch to competitors' products. Products for which customers incur no or few switching costs are subject to intense price and service-based consumption similar to undifferentiated products. The intensity of competitive rivalry increases when success in an industry is important to a large number of firms. For example, the success of a diversified firm may be important to its effectiveness in other industries, especially when the firm is interdependent on related industries. Geographic stakes may also be high. The importance of geographic stakes can be illustrated by the intense rivalry in the U.S. auto industry, as Japanese manufacturers recognize the strategic importance of a U.S. marketplace presence and U.S. manufacturers responded. You have high exit barriers. Exit barriers created by economic, strategic, and emotional factors that cause companies to remain in the industry even though the profitability of doing so is in question, also can increase the intensity of competition in the industry. The higher the barriers to exit, the greater the profitability that competitor actions and reactions will include price cuts and extensive promotions. Some sources of exit barriers include investment in specialized assets or assets whose value is linked to use in a particular industry or location with two or no value as salvaged or in other uses. Fixed costs of exit, such as labor agreements or requirement to repay federal, state, or local aid packages. Strategic relationships, interdependencies within the organization, for example, shared facilities or market access. Emotional barriers, such as loyalty to employees or fear for one's own career. You have government and or social restrictions based on concern for job losses or the economic impact of exit. Interpreting industry analysis is very important. Effective industry analysis are products of careful study and interpretation of data from multiple sources. Because of globalization, international markets and rivalry must be included in the firm's analysis. In fact, research shows international variables may have more impact on strategic competitiveness than domestic ones in some cases. Following a study of the 5 industry forces, the firm has the insights required to determine an industry's attractiveness in terms of the potential to earn adequate or superior returns on its invested capital. In general, the stronger the competitive forces, the lower profit potential for an industry's firms. An unattractive industry has low entry barriers, suppliers, and barriers with strong bargaining positions, strong competitiveness threats from product substitutes, and intense rivalry among competitors, which make it difficult for firms to achieve strategic competitiveness and earn above average returns. An attractive industry has a mirror image of these features and offers little potential for favorable performance. The relationship between the strength of industry forces and price and profits in industry is an inverse one. When the forces are strong, prices or profits in industry tend to be low, whereas weak forces usually lead to higher prices or profits. The mental image in you have in your mind is one of a playground, like a teeter-totter or a balancing scale or balance scale.